Well, hello and welcome to Welty at Home. We are the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We're currently exploring Eudora Welty's 1941 collection of short stories titled A Curtain of Green and Other Stories. During this series, we will read and discuss 3 stories each week between now and February 12th. Today, we will be discussing Flowers for Marjorie, A Curtain of Green, and A Visit of Charity. I'm Jessica Russell, director of the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are so grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, our friend, and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College for guiding these discussions. Suzanne took a break last week. We're thankful to Harriet Pollock for keeping us on track, and we're so glad to have Suzanne back this week. Gonna let some more people in over here, and just some housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select the raise hand function. That's how we're going to know that you have your hand raised and you want to comment. A lively discussion also takes place in the chat as well most weeks, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and then for comments and links. And now, Suzanne, shall we begin?
Let's go. I want to thank Harriet for filling in for me last time, and I'm awfully glad to be back, and I look forward to the discussion. I hated to miss the discussion of the stories last week. When I was talking with the writer Elizabeth Spencer about these stories one time, she said she thought that there were 17 stories, and it was Eudora Welty just so excited, trying out everything she could do and trying so many different things, and all the stories going 17 different ways. And that's true. But as Jessica and I were discussing before today's session, it's also true that these 3 stories, which Eudora placed together near the center of the book, really do speak to each other. So she's doing 3 different approaches here, but we're finding that in those approaches, the stories are sort of in conversation. So I hope we'll put them in conversation at least at the end of our session today. Well, let me start off by talking a little bit about Flowers for Marjorie, and then we'll discuss it. Eudora Welty, as you know, went to school for a year in New York at Columbia, the Columbia University School of Business in 1930 and 31. A year and a little bit more after her father had died, and was looking for work. She thought she would like to stay in New York and have a job there. And while she was there, she came up short. It was the Depression. There were no jobs. She went back in March of 1935, again looking for a job. She had stayed over a month in 33, back in 35. And she took a lot of photographs of unemployed people with her Recamar camera, the film pack camera. And then you can see those if you have a copy of Eudora Welty photographs, or as Jessica, I think, is going to point out to you, there's a way of accessing them online at the Department of Archives and History. In 1936, early in the year, she was again back in New York. And she stopped by a gallery called the Lou Jean Galleries and showed them some of her photographs, not the ones of New York, but the ones of Mississippi. And they arranged for her to have a show of her photographs at the Lou Jean Galleries, which ran from March 31st to April 15th, but no job in New York. I don't really know if she was looking for a job then or if she was just trying to peddle the photographs, but she managed to peddle them. In the fall of 1936, after this, she wrote Flowers for Marjorie, and it was published a year later in Prairie Schooner. So here we have her empathy with those people whose lives she had observed in New York, whose lives were devastated by the Great Depression. Her own experience of New York and during those years was far different. She had a great time in New York. She loved going to the theater. She loved going to galleries. From her relatively affluent position, she could enjoy the city, but she saw that others were not able to do so. Let me also say that Howard talks about being from Victory, Mississippi, and Eudora had planned to have a whole series of stories set in Victory, Mississippi. Lily Daw is set in Victory, Mississippi. Tom Harris drives through Victory, Mississippi, and the Hitchhikers, and here's Howard from Victory, Mississippi, but that collection never materialized. Two other references. I want somebody to tell me if I'm right. If the description of the pansy in Flowers for Marjorie is evocative of Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings of flowers. And then the song Valencia, which I sent you, I think Jessica sent you a link to, which was popular from 1926 onward, a Paul Whiteman song. And the lyrics of that song are, Valencia, in my dreams it always seems I hear you softly call to me. Valencia, where the orange trees forever scent the breeze beside the sea. Valencia, in my arms I held your charms beneath the blossoms high above. You loved me. In Valencia, long ago, we found our paradise of love. In a magic dream of memory, I see you again in that old town far away, beneath the skies of Spain, that city of tender romances, so shy were your glances, and swift as the sunshine that dances through the orange grove, Valencia. You may now thank me for not singing that. I was tempted, and that you would have not enjoyed it. All right, let's talk about Flowers for Marjorie and start with the first paragraph. He was one of the modest, the shy, the sandy-haired, one of those who would always have preferred waiting to one side. A row of feet rested beside his own where he looked down. Beyond was the inscribed base of the drinking fountain, which stemmed with a troubled sound up into the glare of the day. The feet were in V's, all still. Then down at the end of the bench, one softly began to pat. It made an innuendo at a dainty pink chewing gum wrapper blowing by. He would not look up. When the chewing gum wrapper blew over and tilted at his foot, he spat at some sensing of invitation and kicked it away. He held a toothpick in his mouth. Someone spoke. You going to join the demonstration at 2 o'clock? Howard lifted his glance no further than the baggy corduroy knees in front of his own. Demonstration? The tasteless toothpick stuck to his lip. What he said was indistinct. I'll stop there. So here is the opening to Flowers for Marjorie in Union Square Park, which Eudora photographed. Why this opening, and what's the impact of reading these lines at the beginning of the story, of encountering this scene at the beginning of the story? Anyone want to start us off here? If this is a bad question, you can start wherever you want to. No one wants to start? Yeah. G. Bear, what about it? Oh, let's see, you're muted, I think.
Second to get to mute.
There you go.
Well, it certainly shows that this young man, I guess young man, has nothing to do. You know, everything is idle. You know, you're sitting there with a bunch of other men. Your feet are in a V, just sort of sitting with no really special position. The only interesting thing going by is a blowing piece of bubblegum wrapper. So
Yeah.
you know, it shows somebody without anything to do.
Somebody without anything to do, idle, not working, middle of the day, and a lot of other men are not working. And this is definitely evocative of the 30s, isn't it? And of the Depression in New York City. Yeah, John?
I'm gonna this story, for whatever reason, reminded me of Where Do the Voices Come From?
Okay.
And because the interplay between this story and the next two, to me, they're all about some aspect of death.
Right. Yeah. Some aspect of death and some aspect of depression as well, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and I mean, what the reason why it made me think of Where Do the Voices Come From is, to me, she's exploring the mind of someone who at some point decides that he's going to kill another person.
All
And
right, yeah.
I think it's anyway, I think it's fascinating the way she did it.
Well, we start off in the mind of a person who's going to become a murderer.
Yeah,
And we feel a good bit of sympathy for him, don't we? So here we are in the mind of someone who is going to take a life. And we're seeing that he is a victim of horrible economic and social circumstances at the beginning of the story. Yeah, Harry. Well, John, did I cut you off?
oh, that's it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Harriet, and then Joellen.
I was thinking about the way in which this is a murder mystery, the way in which Welty is, picking up that form and playing with it, a form she loves, and that her version of it here is not who is the murderer, we know that, but rather the issue is why the murder. And I think there are, we've been working on the answers, thinking about New York, thinking about the Depression, thinking about, maybe I'll add to it, Howard's reaction to Marjorie's pregnancy. But I'm thinking about the way in which that opening paragraph is a description of one of her photographs. That is that footloose frustration of men on a bench in the middle of the day, unemployed, unable to get work. The demonstration that's being called maybe in Union Square. That sense of footloose frustration of these men. And then I'm thinking too, I'm thinking about urban alienation, thinking about New York and not being home when in the middle of this experience for Howard, where there might be support, but instead a sense of an urban setting. I think we're very much about New York, the story and its details, but I'm thinking about the kind of alienation that we also see in Hitchhikers, or something that is about man displaced,
Being displaced, feeling anonymous.
Yeah. I think about that conversation with the WPA worker. What is it, Miss Ferguson, whom he feels he has a link to, but she's busy typing, and she says some other time. That
yeah, I mean, she's the one person he knows to go to talk to in the city of New York. So, yeah, Joellen.
I just want to quickly point out that it seems to me in the first paragraph, 2 paragraphs, that we don't really know yet that we're in New York. This could be the start of a Faulkner story or something like that, with the men sitting in a row outside the store. But suddenly it enters with you going to join the demonstration at 2 o'clock. So we think there probably weren't going to be demonstrations in Faulkner country.
Right, and that Howard is too much in despair to join a demonstration. He's not fighting back. He's given up. I think that's right. Bill.
Yeah, this not very deep, but it just seems like it's foreshadowing the fact that he hasn't eaten the chewing gum wrapper, the toothpick, even the drinking fountain. There's nothing of substance. The toothpick is tasteless, and he finally spits it out of his mouth, puffs it out of his mouth. So I just, I wouldn't have picked that up, the fact that he hadn't eaten until Marjorie mentions it, but just seemed foreshadowing to me.
Yeah, it is setting us up for that, yeah. So we do have, and I think Joellen's right. At first, you don't sense New York, but by the time those pigeons fly, I think we're pretty sure we're in the urban world, and then it comes clear when he goes home. Okay, let's look at another passage and see what you think of this one. This is when he finds he goes home There's Marjorie, goes, I shouldn't call it home, goes to his apartment. And Marjorie has found a pansy and she has put it in her coat. This is on 120 in the Library of America. Howard lowered his eyes, and once again he saw the pansy. There it shone, a wide open yellow flower with dark red veins and edges against the sky blue of Marjorie's old coat. It began in Howard's anxious sight to lose its identity of flower size and assume the gradual and large curves of a mountain on the horizon of a desert, the veins becoming crevices, the delicate edges, the giant worn lips of a sleeping crater. His heart jumped to his mouth. He snatched the pansy from Marjorie's coat and tore its petals off and scattered them on the floor and jumped on them. Marjorie watched him in silence, and slowly he realized that he had not acted at all, that it only had a terrible vision. So what about this scene? Yeah, Monica.
You know, this sets me up for this whole story. Every time I read it, I end up like going back and checking because I want to know how much of this is actually real, right? Because he has this fantasy of like jumping on the coat, and then he realizes that he hadn't acted at all. And then as you get into the violence of the story, that makes me wonder like how much of this is actually real.
Yeah, has he killed her? Well, we know from the ending that I think pretty well that he has. Yeah, that he doesn't know the difference between illusion and it reminds you also of a story to come, doesn't it? The Whole World Knows, and the delusions in that story. Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Monica's sense that we're interested in dream. And something you mentioned last time. But I was thinking more along the lines of, you mentioned Georgia O'Keeffe, those incredible close-ups of flowers. But I'm also feeling the veins of that flower, the way in which it is beauty, which is extended into kind of close-up. That I'm thinking about the pregnant body and a sense of veins and a beauty which is almost an excess as the body blossoms, or and the way in which the story is about Howard's alienation from the experience, as he feels he's lost communication with Marjorie. Marjorie is on a kind of they have that conversation about time where she says, Howard, can't you keep track of time? And the thing is, they're on different times. She's on natural time and the body in its cycle, and he's on mechanical time, which is up against the clock, as he feels he needs to be a provider, and is also lost his connection to her. I'm looking, a line I like is the moment when he buried his face against her, feeling new desperation every moment in the time-marked softness and the pulse of her sheltering body. So I'm just thinking about pregnancy and that flower.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, that whole sense of natural time, and that Marjorie will know fertility, change, new life coming for her, and he feels totally alienated, not part of this process, but alienated from it. And he is measuring time mechanically, but he's also, for him, time is pretty much stopped. When he throws that clock out the window and breaks it, I mean, I think that's...
yeah, he says, you're the only thing that hasn't stopped. And then he stopped. I'm thinking too across to a wide net, and this kind of the dilemma of pregnancy between husband and wife is something that Welty treats more than once.
Yeah, that's a good connection, I think. Well, so he picks up the butcher knife, and what he thinks is a fantasy. He stabs Marjorie and he leaves. John, I'm going to say, let's talk about the walk through New York before he comes back home, but you start where you want to first.
But one thing I have a hard time that is not fleshed out enough for me about the story is what did Howard think that he was going to find by going to New York City? And the I mean, and whether it was, and who made the suggestion that they go to,
Why
that they
did
go,
they leave Victory, Mississippi? Is that your question? Why are they in New York to start with?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I lived in New York for 2 years, and I don't think it would have been any different then in the Depression than when I lived in there. It's a terribly competitive city. I mean, people go there for a time, and it has the best to offer of nearly everything that it offers. And you can talk to native New Yorkers and they will tell you that. And that's one of the things that drew me and my wife to move into New York and living there, because we wanted to see the kind of town that they were describing. And so I don't see there's any evidence of his, I don't understand the psychology, for lack of a better word, or evidence that he was ever had the type of ambition that you would need to have to
I think he's
get any kind of work at all, you know.
My sense is that he's not there out of ambition, but he is there out of desperation. That in Mississippi, where everyone was pretty poor, but here is maybe an opportunity. And for whatever reason, they've come there, and he is not the person to cope with this. Gilbert?
I'm not clear that Marjorie's from Mississippi or that they're
Yeah.
married.
I think she says all the girls in Victory, Mississippi were like Marjorie.
I didn't say she was from Mississippi. Anyway, just wondering if this is somebody in New York that he's gotten to know. Language doesn't seem country rural to me. I just wonder where he had been there by himself and found this Marjorie and gotten her pregnant, and now he's finding himself in a jam. But it could be.
Right. It doesn't say specifically, but it does say it was hard to remember in this city of dark, nervous, loud-spoken women that in Victory, Mississippi, all girls were like Marjorie. So I've taken it that way, but you're right. It doesn't say it explicitly. Yeah. Well, let's talk about this walk through New York, where you know that Eudora is filling us with delivering detail after detail of things that she's seen, but she's making a selection, and I think the selection of these images is an important issue here. So what about the images that as he makes this journey of fleeing home, wanting not in quest of anything except escape, probably from the oppressiveness of his home, Yeah, Marcia.
You're muted, Marcia.
Yeah. So the walk made me think of a music from Spain. The modernism, well, and that walk in San Francisco is very much like a part of Ulysses, the novel Ulysses. This does not have the modernist hallmarks that one does, but the idea that you convey, the same thing happens in James Joyce's Ulysses, that you convey the world by selecting the details that the perambulator sees as he goes along. That's very much the way Joyce shows us who and where Leopold Bloom is. That's
Mhm.
all. It just made me think of that.
Oh, yeah, a good parallel, I think. What else? Let's take some specific images. The machine, let's see, the children playing, the cat that he goes by, the children playing, the messenger guy, the machine making donuts, the posters of the Virgin Mary, the joke toilets, and the palpitator heart, imitation heart, the paperweight, the sign in the subway that says God sees me, the man singing Let Me Call You Sweetheart, an organ grinder playing Valencia, the bar where he wins all the nickels in the slot machine, the WPA office, Radio City Music Hall, all of those things. What about, why choose these? Do any of them stand out to you, Jessica?
Well, I thought these were funny because we're in New York, but they reminded me so much of what Welty shows us through her lens and through her stories about the Mississippi State Fair and the oddities and the freak show sideshows that she likes to see.
I hadn't thought of that, Jessica. I like that. Okay, John and then Bill.
Well, one thing that happens, after he's murdered Marjorie, is that he goes out and suddenly his fortune changes.
Yeah.
To entirely his on this walk, a man gives him a dime. He goes and buys some whiskey. He takes a nickel, and there, to me, there's the implication that the dime wouldn't have paid for the whiskey, and he puts the nickel into the slot machine, and then he gets such a large amount of money out of the slot machine that people are scrambling, in the bar to get some of it. And it's the timing. If he had been a little bit more patient, possibly, he wouldn't have reached the state that he did, where he felt compelled to murder Marjorie.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's and his fortune continues to, the roses that he
Yeah.
received, and
The key to the city. The key to the city.
the key to the city. Just
Yeah, so the irony of he's so in despair, thinking time has stopped, nothing can change. But the minute he gives into that and goes out afterwards, things do change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, one of the common names of a pansy is heart's ease. If you say it fast enough, it's heart cease. But there's all kinds of references to heart in these things that he sees or hears. On page 124, palpitator, the imitation heart. Quite often, the Virgin Mary has a flaming heart in the middle of her chest. Then let me call you sweetheart, he hears from a beggar singing. And so just all these fantastic images, but the ones that really stood out for me were the heart images.
Right, and the irony of what he has done in terms of these images and the love he feels. Yeah, Joubert.
And of course, the nickel spurting out into his lap, just as her blood spurted out into her lap. And I was intrigued by the woman with the red right arm, the red-armed woman. He's got a red arm too.
This time somehow I kept following his hat. He's always trying to keep his hat on his head. I don't know how many references there are to pulling it onto his head or doffing it, and it's almost as like somebody has said to him, keep your hat on, keep yourself under control. He's trying to keep the hat on, and he's lost it, I think. He's lost that control. All right, then we've talked a bit about the focus on time, and I think time is another powerful thing we could go on talking about, but maybe since it's 12:30, we better move to A Curtain of Green. And so we're out of New York. we're back in Larkins Hill, Mississippi. This story was written and published in 1938, published in the Southern Review in autumn 1938. I talked to Eudora about the origins of this story, and I said, Eudora, when you were writing A Curtain of Green, were you thinking about your mother and the death of your father and her turning more and more to the garden in her grief? And she said to me, I hope my mother never realized that. And that has always sort of haunted me. I hope my mother never realized that. And the story, I think, is disguised. This is not Mrs. Welty's garden, thank goodness. Justina Welty was an ardent gardener, and she said that she found her garden satisfying, though never perfect. And then she really also suggested that one of the reasons it was satisfying was because it was never perfect, because there was always more to do. The joy was in the journey, in the doing, the creating. Here's what she wrote in a little essay that was never published. The loved garden is always satisfyingly responsive to moods. It flaunts its colors joyously when we are glad. Its peace and fragrance are soothing to frayed nerves when we are weary with contact or perhaps conflict with the everyday world. And its recurrent beauty whispers a message of comfort and hope when our hearts are lonely or sorrowful. And she saw gardening as a creative enterprise. She said, creating a garden is much like painting a picture or writing a poem. And artists and poets often make lovely gardens, but sometimes we less articulate folks who can neither paint pictures nor write poems, yet feel the need of expressing ourselves, find a garden a very happy medium. So this is not Mrs. Larkin, but the story was inspired by her mother's turn to the garden after the death of Christian Webb Welty. All right, so let's start off by talking about what does the garden mean to Mrs. Larkin? Why is she creating a jungle rather than the orderly garden that we know that we find at the Welty house that Jessica takes care of? What about this jungle that she's creating? Yeah, Harriet?
Thinking about the parts of the story, I think about the women in the windows, looking down, picking out that figure like tweezers, and the social world that they're in, where there is a judgment about what a garden should be, and what behaviors should be. Flowers are for giving to other people, and gardens are for beauty. And that's and there's this moment when you alluded to the line where to the neighbors gazing down from their upstairs window, it had the appearance of a jungle. And I'm thinking that Mrs. Larkin is in the jungle, that Mrs. Larkin has discovered the unaccountability of nature, as her husband has been killed by a falling tree, and that she immerses herself in the garden. I'm thinking about it almost as developing antibodies through exposure, that she immerses herself in the natural world as she is stuck on the experience of the accountability of nature.
She immerses herself in the world that has killed her husband, the natural world. And in some sense, she's trying to participate in it or to find some source of power in it. So it's contradictory in seeing it as overwhelming, as unknowable, but also of trying to be part of it, I think, of part of the power, regained power. Yeah, Monica, and then Marcia. Well,
this is one of my favorite stories, and I've been writing about it quite a bit lately. But But the beginning of it, in terms of the purpose of the garden, there's also very much a Sleeping Beauty aspect to it. I think that, you know, you get this sense of the plants taking over the house, like the plants took over Sleeping Beauty's castle, as a way of kind of driving out the rest of the, you know, closing off from the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah, and then she is Sleeping Beauty there at the end. Marcia.
Well, I see the garden as a metaphor, the tangled, confused garden as a metaphor for her mind. That's what has become of her mind. She can't, it can't be orderly or beautiful because her mind is so confused. And we haven't talked yet about her threat to the boy, but part of her mind is anger. She's horribly angry. And we see that when she threatens the boy. But I think the garden is a metaphor for her mind.
She has seen her husband killed when a chinaberry tree falls exactly so as to strike and kill him. And when she is thinking, don't let this happen. I love you. I will protect you. And all of her efforts at protection are futile. She can't protect him. And that, you know, that recognition of that our existential plight here is what has, made her mind into a jungle, or made her want to sort of encounter the jungle that the world seems to be and find some sense of understanding, perhaps. Bill?
Yeah, there's a paragraph on page 134. It begins towards the bottom of the page. Begins, such a head she could strike off intentionally when she's, as somebody has already pointed out, threatening Jamie. But then it goes on, life and death, she thought, gripping the heavy hoe, life and death, which now meant nothing to her, but which she was compelled continually to wield with both her hands, ceaselessly asking, was it not possible to compensate? So the garden for her is where she can play God. She can say what's going to live and what's going to die, you know?
Without possible to compensate, to punish, to protest.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, it kind of links back to Flowers for Marjorie, when he feels her safety. He feels her, all the things that she wrote about. And that's why he killed her. And that's why she's going to kill Jamie here if she wanted to, for those same kind of reasons.
I think that's right. I want to talk about this threat to Jamie. And so
there's a fairy tale quality to all three of these, you know, stories.
I think so too. And so Howard sees in Marjorie someone whose life is fulfilled and is moving and is oblivious to his desperation. And she sees in Jamie someone who has hope, who has a dream, who's the head of Jamie was terrifying, wonderful, almost inaccessible to her, yet in its explicit nearness surely meant for destruction, with its clustered hot woolly hair, its intricate glistening ears, its small brown branching streams of sweat, the bowed head holding so obviously and so deathly its ridiculous dream. He has a kind of hope that she can't have. And so to protest or to compensate or to, what's the other one? To punish, she thinks of striking out at him. I want us to raise the issue of race here and the view of Jamie as well. John.
I don't have anything to say about the issue of race. I do think the garden reminded me of the Garden of Eden.
All right. Yeah.
And that the pear tree, which there's a reference early in the story about she would move to the shelter of the pear tree, which had hung almost to the ground and brilliant full in the center of the garden. And that the pear tree is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's no indication to me that she ever took the pear and ate it. And but the and she may or may not have, but the it seems to me that she that she is in the shadow of the tree, that she's trying to take what she has learned from the tree and is trying to replicate it in her own way in the garden. And
Right. Go ahead.
and that it's curious to me that the people who are looking into it, they don't understand it at all, and they don't think there's any beauty there. And I'm not sure where I want to go with that, except she's got a totally different conception or comprehension of what a garden should be than these other people do who look down into the garden.
And metaphorically look down upon her as well as literally look upon her. And their idea is that, oh, she never even sent us a flower, you know, she's got a garden, we never got a flower. Okay. So yeah, so a totally different perspective. And she is confronting a kind of reality that these women have cordoned off with their societal constraints, I think. Yeah. Harriet and then Monica.
I'm thinking back to Bill's remark about controlling. I'm thinking over to A Still Moment and to Muriel, who's the murderer story, who the story is about death and understanding it, and it is also for Muriel, he can't prevent it, but he can cause it. He can cause death. There's a little bit of that in Mrs. Larkin here, and this anger emerging inexplicably to the raised hoe, and to think about race and story. I think it's an incredible story for the time when Welty is writing about it, in the way in which this is a middle-class white woman, maybe middle to upper middle class white woman, who is the threat to the young Black man, and his vulnerability and his awareness, and also ignoring sort of what's happening, the danger that he's in this encounter. It's just interesting to me that the story doesn't end simply with Mrs. Larkin fainting in the garden, and in a moment of, with the rain comes and creates a change where she maybe experiences a moment of the beauty, the acceptance of the natural world. But
when the rain comes, as maybe evocative of the wasteland here, the rain coming at the end and the rebirth, acquiescence, and that sense that each thing is, there's an arcade of identity.
But it doesn't end there. It ends with Jamie, which is just
yeah. I think that is an important point. It doesn't end with that arcade of identity, that sense, but with Jamie knowing it's time to get the hell out of here. Yeah. Monica, and then Joellen.
Well, there's been quite a bit of talk in the chat about comparing these three stories, especially to Flannery O'Connor's. And when I taught this once, and I don't know if Bill was there or not, several people said, I was expecting when she swung the hoe up, I thought this was suddenly going to turn into a Flannery O'Connor story. And we talked about what would have happened in a Flannery O'Connor story, that for O'Connor's violent kind of grace, she would have swung the hoe down and maybe their eyes would have met as she was crashing his skull in or something. And that would have been Mrs. Larkin's vision of grace, or, similar to the end of Everything Arises Must Converge, which ends with the white woman on the ground convulsing. But instead, and I just find it so incredibly powerful that instead the rain comes and we get on 135, in the light from the rain, different from sunlight, everything appeared to gleam unreflecting from within itself, its quiet arcade of identity. And I just think it's so interesting to compare. I mean, I read this in comparison to O'Connor's later work, of course, which is coming later, as a vision of grace in this story. And it's a very different vision from O'Connor's. And I think it's really interesting to compare what I see as like two different visions of grace.
I was going to read a poem by William Stafford that I think suggests that as well. So maybe I'll do that at the end. Yeah, Joellen.
I was going down a very similar path as to Harriet's, and if you'll, on the very first page at the bottom, 130, she would stand still for a moment, echoing a still moment. But that was kind of grounding her in the day. That would be before she ever started working. But unlike Howard, Mrs. Larkin needs to stop. She needs to be still. And that becomes more of a focus as we go on, especially when the rain came. But this day, we know from the beginning, the story starts every day. Second paragraph begins one day. We know something's happening. The rain holds off, and it's going to be different and a change coming up. Stillness is Jamie embodies. That's one thing, his vision, his dream, he's still, he's connected somehow. I mean, somehow this makes me think of Sarah Orne Jewett and the oceanic moment. He was in a rhythm, and she doesn't get there maybe until the end, and with the rain which fells her and she sleeps. But something's happened there. And I also look at Jamie as being used as a racial figure in the way that William Faulkner uses, I can't think of her name, the woman at the end of Go Down Moses, as perhaps African Americans can open another way into the future for us. I think that there's a kind of look at an alternative here, whether we would see that as positive or negative now.
You know, the white community says there's only Jamie. I mean, it's as if he's nothing. And he is the one person in the garden with Mrs. Larkin. And he is the one who embodies this idea of hope, I think, you know.
Yeah.
That she can't quite find for herself. You know, Harriet.
I'm just thinking across stories now. I'm thinking about the flower imagery and its repetition. I'm actually thinking back to Clytie and to my having just thought about the ocean, the water nymph mythology that has her the figure of Clytie transformed into a flower that stares up at the sun. But I'm reading, she would not feel anything now except the rain falling. Its scattered soft drops, tenderness, tore and spun through her sagging body. Mrs. Larkin sank in one motion down into the flowers and lay there, fainting and streaked with rain. Her face was fully upturned down among the plants. And that is a transformation of her. It is, and she's unconscious though, and yet she's, it's as if she's naturalized. You know, we have the nature's mystery and her falling into this landscape and becoming a part of it in a way that is harmonious and tender and soft and different than the person she's been up until this moment.
Yep. Should we, I hate to leave, I love A Curtain of Green. I think we could stay on it, but let's say a little bit about A Visit of Charity, which I found a much more powerful story on this reading than I've ever found it before. Does anyone want to start us off on A Visit of Charity? I don't think that Eudora was a campfire girl. Somebody may know, maybe I've knew it and forgot it, but I don't think she was. I went back and looked at newspapers.com to see if I could find any mention of Mrs. Welty being a leader in the campfire or Eudora being a member, and I didn't find anything. I have heard her, however, sing the song I'm a Camp a Fire Girl by Beatrice Lilly, and she loved B. Lilly, and there was this funny little song about being a campfire girl. And of course, in Jackson, there was the old ladies' home. It was right out by Livingston Lake, where we have been in a memory. So here was an institution in Jackson of the old ladies' home. Eudora may have visited there as this little girl does. I don't know that she did, but certainly I think she would have had friends who might have done that, and she would have heard stories about it. So this story, written in 1940, published in Decision in June 1941, just before the book itself was published. Okay, so let's talk about A Visit of Charity. Anybody want to start us off? Monica.
Well, it's so fun to read these three together and think about time, because the first page of this has that the nursing home has a smell in the hall like the interior of a clock, which is just weird. But I'm thinking it's like wood and metal, maybe perhaps. But again, taking
Oil.
these three together, oil, yeah,
Mechanics.
is a really interesting kind of meditation on time. Because these girls, certainly the campfire girls and the people in the nursing home, have very different visions and understandings of time.
I have two T-shirts about my old age. One says, "It's weird to be the same age as old people." And the other one says, "I don't know how to act my age. I've never been this old before." And certainly these are stories about time and the young girl encountering old age, and the terrors of old age and the terrors of encountering it as a young girl. Yeah, Joubert.
You might have given me an answer to my own question. I was going to ask if anybody had any sense of the repeated themes of waves in here. She walked like a wave. She has white caps on the ocean. And but I think of the cyclical nature of waves, and this aging cycle is a wave that just keeps rocking back and forth through time. So maybe there is a cyclical wave theme going on here.
And it's, and the story is not just about the cycle of time, but it's also about the way we handle old age, the way we deal with old age in our society. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking across stories again, from Jamie's Innocence to the Campfire Girls. I'm thinking about the conflict again between the social world and something that is more profound. So here we've got this 14-year-old point-seeking campfire girl who represents the same society as the women in the windows in A Curtain of Green. She has to pay a visit to some old lady. Any of them will do. There were 3 points to her, and maybe an extra point if she brings flowers, and of course, but not as much as if she brought a Bible. And
She
then
didn't bring a Bible. No, she could
right.
have gotten an extra point.
That's right. Could have. But then the nurse who shoves her into the room of Claude Crohn's, and Addie, and I'm thinking about them as Addie and Auntie Addie, doubles that are foils with the socially acceptable nameless roommate who is she's given no name. She has no individual identity. She is these socially acceptable platitudes about receiving the pretty flowers, as opposed to Addie's response that the flowers are stinkweeds, sort of the Addie's expressing age, illness, institutionalization, the condition of her life, and more, I think, but I'll come back to that later. But for now, I'm just thinking about the parallels between the stories.
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, this story is what really made me think all of them are fairy tales. And in this one, Marion never introduces herself by name. She just says, "I'm a campfire girl." You know, I'm a
girl.
campfire girl. And
Yeah.
so it just kind of reminded me of she's a brownie too,
Yeah.
that sense. And a brownie is a little mystical fairy creature. And so she's a little fairy creature in this fairy tale with uh and there's one on page 139, one little exchange, a couple little exchanges there I thought were really, really amusing. Uh the Aunt Addie, I'll call her, who's in bed. She says, "Who enjoyed it?" "We enjoyed it," insisted the other.
Yeah.
"You enjoyed it." "I enjoyed it." And Marion says, "We all enjoyed it." It's like it's an incantatory kind of chant that
They're
they're all
conjugating
participating.
them. Yeah.
Yes. And then there was a couple of things. Yeah, like when she talks about being in a robber's cave,
Yeah.
there's the tales out of Arabia, where she's entered the robber's den, and how is she going to get out? But she's not afraid this whole time. She is a mystical, mysterious little creature. And at the very end, she takes a bite out of the apple.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean exactly? Has she decided to join life? Has she decided she's going to be participating in it? Is it the apple from the garden of,
Yeah. I'll go back to Noel Polk there, who was very big on talking about this apple. And here she's hidden the apple. That's what she's hiding before she goes in. She goes back, gets it, and she takes a bite. And I think she has lost to some extent her innocence. She has encountered the terms of our lives. We are going to grow old, and we may be abandoned, and we may be consigned to life with strangers we don't like. And the society may put us in a building that's like a block of ice, with the nurse who consults her watch in a mechanical fashion and reads Field and Stream rather than paying attention to the patients. And so I do think in some sense she's lost her innocence, but then when she goes for that bus, she's also fleeing, I think, the knowledge, it seems to me, that has come to her. She responds when the woman cries. She's crying, she responds to that, I think. But then it's get me out of here. She's fleeing. Yeah, Joe Ellen.
I think that Welty absolutely overloads us with, we could think of descent stories with Persephone, even the apple, Virgil and Dante, just all kinds of things. And so I think that I think there's sort of red herrings, but we definitely do have the story of this young woman entering this world, and she's disoriented, walking on what feel like waves to her. And she forgets her name. There are a couple of things where at the top of 138, the nurse says, "There are two in each room." "Two what?" asked Marion. And on the next page, the old woman says, "Watch out for the germs." The other says, one came out last month to see us. "A sheep or a germ?"
Yes.
Marion wondered dreamily. But all of a sudden she focuses, and it's on Addie. And it's toward the top of page 142, we're told that Marion sees Addie, and she actually speaks. How old are you? It's the notion of the birthday and her age. And then it says she sees her almost as a Picasso portrait from all angles. She wondered about her. She wondered for a moment, as though there was nothing else in the world to wonder about. It was the first time such a thing had happened to Marion. And I think that's the very most important thing that happens to her. Even though she goes out, gets the apple that she hid in a prickly bush so she wouldn't have to give it to the old ladies, bites in. So she's young. She's back in the world of energy with her red coat. And will she even remember this? Who knows? But she's had a moment.
Right. She's had that moment. She's totally self-absorbed, except for that moment. But she's had that moment, and it may stand her in good stead. and recognizing the plight that we share. I think we're just about out of time. We are out of time. Jessica, do you want to sum up? And then let's see if we can't next time begin by talking about the threads that tie these three stories together. Yeah.
That's right. And we can have time. I can go for another 5 minutes today if you want to entertain the last two more comments from Joe Ellen and Harriet, and then we can
Oh, sorry,
close.
my hand's down.
Good. So we're going to give you two the last word. Joellen, you had one?
I just hadn't gotten my hand down.
Okay. Harriet,
Harriet.
you want to close us out?
Okay, I'll jump in to say, I want to switch the emphasis from Marion to Addie. Because I think that Welty gives Addie this moment of delivering a kind of treatise on words between strangers. And I'm thinking of the moment when she says, "You talk all the time until I think I'm losing my mind. Who are you? You're a stranger, a perfect stranger. Don't you know you're a stranger?" And I'm thinking about Welty, who uses language to part a curtain, that she's written her wishes to part a curtain, that invisible shadow that falls between people. But that also here, is recognition that at its worst, language is a curtain that makes not art or celebration, but only talk. That's neither truth nor reception, but is actively obstructing communication. And I'm thinking about the anti-Addie now and social language and what Addie has to say about it. It's you talk all the time.
It's all prefabricated. Yeah. I will say also that think about Eudora Welty writing this story in 1940. So she's 31 years old. And
Yeah.
looking back to the young girl and looking ahead to the old woman and imagining herself into lives not her own, and the greatness of the imagination that can span those years, and imagine herself what it is like to be Addie, but also what is it like to have been Marion. So yeah. Okay, I think we'll stop there, Jessica.
That's right. And next week we'll be back and we will discuss Death of a Traveling Salesman, Powerhouse, and A Worn Path. Thanks, everybody. See you then.
See you next week.